From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. United States Vice President Mike Pence met with Central American Presidents Jimmy Morales of Guatemala, Juan Orlando Hernández of Honduras, and Salvador Sánchez Serén of El Salvador on Thursday in Guatemala City as part of his Latin American tour. Pence urged the leaders to dissuade their people from attempting to enter the United States unlawfully. He added that migrants from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador are claiming asylum, but few are really fleeing persecution. The U.S. Vice President said that since the beginning of the year, more than 150,000 people from these three countries have arrived at the southern border of the United States.
Most are making the journey seeking economic opportunity, driven by the misguided belief that they can ignore the laws of the United States and enter our nation without consequences. I say with great respect to the presidents gathered here, this exodus must end. Don't risk your lives or the lives of your children by coming to the United States on the road run by drug smugglers and human traffickers. Hold on to your homes and your homeland. Hold on to your children. Build your lives in your homes.
But the president of El Salvador, Salvador Sánchez Serén, once again asked for the rights of migrants to be respected. The White House has been battling critics of its zero-tolerance policy on immigration since the forced separation of children from parents sparked uproar and led to U.S. President Donald Trump signing an executive order ending this practice.
As a government, we have asked for the human rights of our migrants to be respected at all times, and today this petition has been ratified. This results in motivation to continue developing, broadening, and strengthening this strategy within the confines of complying with responsibilities of the prosperity of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala.
The increasingly harsh environment for migrants is taking its toll. Our correspondent in Guatemala, Santiago Boton, has more details.
We're in the park of Iscanquiché in the north of Guatemala, waiting for the arrival of the 15-year-old migrant who was detained by immigration authorities after the death of his father when they were beside the Mexican border. The father's name was Jaime Joel Sanchez Medina. He died of suffocation inside a truck where he was heading to the U.S. border. The tragedy happened almost a month ago when they left the municipality of Ixcan. Family members have asked the Foreign Ministry to help with the repatriation because, according to family members, the remains are still in a hospital in Tamaulipas, Mexico.
Santiago Boton from Guatemala. On Thursday, Vice President Pence met President of Ecuador, Lenín Moreno, on the second leg of his Latin American tour. Pence repeated his call for Latin American countries to place pressure on Venezuela. Pence said the United States would support Ecuador in its compassionate response to Venezuelan migrants, but that more needed to be done.
But as we discussed today, compassion alone will not end this crisis. It will only end when Venezuela is free once more. As President Trump has made clear, the United States will not stand idly by while Venezuela crumbles. To pressure the Maduro regime and restore democracy in the United States has issued unprecedented sanctions against the dictatorship in Caracas. And as you and I discussed today, we respectfully urge Ecuador and all of our allies across the region to take steps to further isolate the Maduro regime.
President Pence was welcomed at the government palace by Ecuadorian Foreign Minister José Valencia. The Vice President and the Ecuadorian President Lenín Moreno held a bilateral meeting where they discussed topics related to trade, security, and democracy in Latin America.
The visit of Vice President Pence has been very positive. The United States and Ecuador have reached agreements. Of course, we have discrepancies, but through dialogue we will achieve brotherhood.
During the meeting, the Vice President Pence congratulated President Moreno for his leadership and also said the United States will work to tackle security threats, especially threats from transnational criminal organizations, drug trafficking, and corruption.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that the United States will support that effort to root out corruption with nearly $1.5 million to support your efforts. to end corruption and strengthen civil society in Ecuador.
For analysts, Pence's visit raises of his true motive, especially as Pence insists on interfering in Venezuela's domestic policy.
No longer does Latin America have progressive governments like we had years ago. That cycle is over. The expansion in Latin America of the United States' policies is increasing.
Mike Pence is the third U.S. vice president to visit Ecuador since 1958. Pence arrived in Ecuador on Wednesday, coming from Brazil, and will travel to Guatemala as part of his Latin America tour. Denise Herrera, Telesur Quito, Ecuador.
After a long and exhausting session at the European Union headquarters in Brussels, European leaders have agreed a deal on migration. The leaders agreed to share out refugees arriving in the bloc on a voluntary basis and to create controlled centers inside the European Union to process asylum requests. Accommodating the demands of Italy's new Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte, the members also agreed to share responsibility for migrants rescued in the Mediterranean Sea.
After this summit, Europe is more responsible and offers more solidarity. Today, Italy is no longer alone.
After 9 hours of debate and work, a deal has been struck, and this is good news for France. This was the result of a joint effort, and European cooperation has won, rather than a non-agreement or national decisions that would have been neither efficient nor sustainable.
Even though European leaders hailed the migration agreement as a victory and a breakthrough, experts say this deal lacks details. It doesn't specify how the migrants will be shared out, who qualifies for asylum, and how the detention centers will be managed. The agreement also calls for migrant processing centers in North African countries such as Libya and Egypt, but it's unclear if the African countries have been consulted or agreed to it. And as the EU celebrated its deal in Brussels, the Libyan Coast Guard said it thought around 100 migrants had drowned off the coast on Friday. 14 survivors were rescued. New figures from the International Organization for Migration estimate that 972 refugees have drowned in the Mediterranean this year, 635 of them trying to reach Italy. It puts the total number of refugees reaching Europe this year at 45,000. Much less than in previous years. The lead up to this year's Mexican presidential elections is going to be remembered as one of the bloodiest and most brutal in history. With the election just around the corner, we take a look at the political motivated violence that has plagued the campaigns.
Just a couple of days before the campaigns closed, 5 members of the Morena party were found dead in Oaxaca, all of whom died from gunshot wounds. Targeted assassinations are taking place by unknown assailants in a bid to control the country's future. Since the start of the election campaigns in September last year until now, 43 attacks were recorded against politicians, with 113 killed, according to ETELECT, a Mexican political consulting agency. Those who weren't killed were subjected to threats and intimidation, including attacks against family members, with a total of 60 relatives being killed. Due to the extent and level of brutality, hundreds of candidates have backed out of the electoral process, fearing reprisals, their safety, and the well-being of their loved ones.
Nicaraguans held a mass in the capital city of Managua to demand justice and the end of violence in their country after almost 2 months of ongoing protests. At least 173 people have died, according to the Truth, Justice and Peace Commission. At the cathedral, priest Valdemar Stanislaw said people have to work for peace and made a call for the violence to end. The dialogue between different negotiating tables resumed on Thursday, but meetings between President Daniel Ortega and opposition groups haven't prospered. The opposition asked the government to call for an early elections, but authorities have yet to respond.
Throughout all Nicaragua, we are asking for peace, the peace that we need so much and we had before. We will not lose it.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again after this video from our multimedia team.
decidido y presupuestado.
Welcome back. Honduran former President Manuel Zelaya commemorated with his supporters the 9th anniversary of the 2009 coup d'etat that ousted him from power. Zelaya called for people to take to the streets in 298 different municipalities and proposed a referendum to form a national assembly in order to draft a new constitution. His party will survey people from Sunday to push his proposal. Around 150 students from the National University joined the event, but they were repressed by police forces with tear gas.
The coup broke the democracy system in Honduras, with a material and moral cost that we are still paying with the sacred blood of our bravest militant men and women.
Opposition politicians in Colombia are preparing to challenge the amendments made by Congress to a key part of the peace process with the FARC. They say the changes, which were demanded by supporters of the president-elect Iván Duque, are unconstitutional.
After several hours of discussion, the Senate voted in favor of the proposition of the Democratic Center on Article 53 that seeks to limit the functions of the JEP in matters of extradition.
We managed to eliminate the faculty of the JEP in the case of extraditions. The extraditions are a cooperation process between the nations that allows one to rely on that government and that simply checks that the date of the facts requested by the country be later than the signing of the agreements.
Immediately after, there was the vote of the new article proposed by the Democratic Center that seeks to create a special function within the JEP for the judgment of military forces.
A new procedure for the military will be issued after 18 months that will give them the guarantees that the government had promised, and that was never agreed in neither in the statutory law or in procedure.
After the voting and approval of the law, Senator Roy Barreras said the articles on extradition and judgment will have to be analyzed by the Constitutional Court.
Two articles were voted in disagreement. I voted no because they are unconstitutional. To summarize, the military can have a special justice only for them because that is unconstitutional. The safest way to judge them is the JEP. That will be determined by the Constitutional Court.
On the other hand, the Defense Minister, Luis Carlos Villegas, regretted the approval of the new article on the judgment of the military forces members.
We continue thinking that this is an unconstitutional article because the Constitution doesn't allow picking or choosing of new procedural rules.
The next step is that the lower house and the Senate vote on the conciliation of the law so President Santos can sanction it.
So let's take a look at what those amendments to this key part of the peace process involve. These amendments, which the FARC have called an attack on the peace agreement signed in Havana. The first change freezes the trials of members of the police or military involved in crimes during the armed conflict for 18 months, until a special judicial process is created to deal with them within the JEP. The second change is that the special jurisdiction for peace won't have a say over the extradition of former guerrillas accused of crimes committed after the peace deal was signed. This will have a direct impact on FARC leader Jesus Santrich, who is facing an extradition request from the United States. Both of these changes are being challenged as unconstitutional. Moving along, Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza wrapped up his Caribbean tour in St. Kitts, meeting with Prime Minister Dr. Timothy Harris. Arreaza reassured Prime Minister Harris of Venezuela's commitment to energy arrangements that exist between Venezuela and several Caribbean nations, including St. Kitts and Nevis. The Prime Minister noted that he has, on several occasions, visited Venezuela to further strengthen the bilateral and regional cooperation agenda as it relates to the matter of energy and other socio-economic programs.
Again, become one of the strong.
Many same-sex couples in Costa Rica have organized marriages looking to legalize them. Authorities haven't solved the citizens' concern, and it increases right before the LGBTI Pride March set for Sunday.
Newlyweds Jonathan and Luis Paulino are fighting to have the same rights as any other heterosexual couple in Costa Rica.
We are adults and we can be together. We keep fighting and we must fight because our rights must be recognized.
They went to the civil registry to try and legalize their marriage, a move they hope will help push for the legalization of same-sex marriage.
We understand that this is part of a bigger fight, one for equality, for human rights, for people's dignity and for sexual diversity in Costa Rica. This is the context and the reasons for which we continue with this process.
Just like Jonathan and Luis Paulino, many same-sex couples have gotten married, but there is still little clarity about the 6th clause of Article 14 of the Family Code that forbids these kinds of union.
I share their opinion on this matter. The prohibition of same-sex marriage is already abolished, because the Inter-American Court of Justice stated that forbidding such a thing is a human rights violation.
The advisory opinion of the Inter-American Court of Justice referred to Costa Rica on January 9th, stating that it is mandatory to protect the rights of every kind of family.
The advisory opinion is mandatory for every country which is party to the San Jose Agreement. It is what they should follow in Latin America.
The interpretation of the advisory opinion is in the hands of Costa Rican authorities. After a decision is reached, LGBTI people will clearly know which steps to follow.
Nicaragua's LGBTI community marched in the capital city of Managua on Thursday to demand the country respects their rights. Hundreds of people marched on the main avenues of the capital under the slogan Civil Disobedience. Student, political, and social movements joined the march to demand freedom and the end of discrimination. The LGBTI movement also called for the end of violence and for justice for those who have died since the political crisis started in the country.
My country suffers from macho culture that affects women and men. This has been going on for a very long time. But I believe that we have gathered here as activists to change this. This is our moment.
We need to fight for our freedom, to be able to move and work freely, to fight for our rights daily as people and as professionals.
The recently discovered remains of children sacrificed by the pre-Hispanic Chimu culture as ritual offerings will be housed at a soon-to-be-built museum in Huanchaco in northern Peru. The museum will be built near the excavation site where the remains were found. Until now, the remains of 251 children have been discovered, believed to be between the ages of 5 and 15. They were buried facing the sea, along with 200 llamas who were facing at the Andes. The Chimu culture dates back to 1470 AD when it was conquered by the Inca Empire. Now to the World Cup. As the group stage comes to an end, 16 teams have moved on to the knockout stage. Let's take a look at the matches that await fans starting on Saturday. Uruguay will play against Cristiano Ronaldo and Portugal. Spain will face the host country, Russia. France will play against Argentina, and Croatia will face Denmark. Five-time world champion Brazil will play against Mexico. Sweden will face Switzerland. Colombia will play against England, and Belgium will face Japan. Moving along, former political prisoners of Argentina's dictatorship between 1976 and 1983 recalled celebrating the national team's 1978 World Cup championship win while suffering at the hands of their captors. Political prisoners supported their team from the basement of the torture center ESMA, where almost 5,000 people were detained during the regime of Jorge Rafael Videla. Victims recalled their experience during the opening ceremony of the Memorial Museum where the detention center used to be.
They took people out of here to watch matches. They took me to the stadium of River Plate, of Vélez Sarsfield. I was watching these games to see if someone came up to me, if someone knew me.
Listening to him say he was cheering for us when he was suffering are things that have no words. I don't know how to explain that, as we have done 1,000 times. I didn't really have the slightest idea, like many other people in the country.
We'll take one last short break, but join us again after this video from our multimedia team. Thanks for joining us again. Around 600 protesters, mostly women, were arrested at the U.S. capital of Washington, D.C. when they were demonstrating against the mistreatment of immigrants by the U.S. border officials. The protesters occupied a U.S. Senate office building, wrapping themselves in metallic silver blankets, similar to those given to migrant children separated from their families. Bigger protests across the country have been planned against President Donald Trump's zero-tolerance policy on immigration. Police in the U.S. have taken the shooter in the newspaper office attack into custody. Here's more on that and other stories making headlines around the world.
U.S. police have identified the gunman who allegedly killed 5 staff members of the newspaper Capital Gazette in Annapolis, Maryland on Thursday. The suspect is 38-year-old Jared Warren Ramos, who had sued the newspaper and one of its journalists in 2012, alleging defamation. Among the victims were 4 journalists and a sales executive.
He is at our criminal investigation division. Our detectives are down there with him. I have not interrupted them to ask him if he's being cooperative.
When do you think we're going to get any more into him?
That's going to be part of the investigation. I can't confirm for you whether or not he actually knew employees there or if he just targeted the business in general.
The Iraqi government has executed 12 prisoners believed to be members of the Islamic State. The executions were carried out on the order of Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi in retaliation to the murder of 8 policemen and military personnel allegedly carried out by the ISIS earlier this week. According to a judicial source, in April, more than 300 people, including around 100 foreign women, have been sentenced to death in Iraq and hundreds of others to life imprisonment for allegedly membership to the Islamic State. An oil tanker caught fire in Nigeria's commercial capital Lagos on Thursday, killing 9 people and setting fire to more than 50 vehicles. The accident happened as the tanker failed to brake and skidded off the road.
And before we end our show, remember you can watch our special World Cup program with Argentina football star Diego Maradona. De la mano del 10, the World Cup, according to Maradona, will air only on Telesur every night during the tournament in Russia. These are the times to watch it, so don't miss out. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. But there's another stories, as you know, you can find on our website, Telesur TV, telesur.net/English. And you can join us also on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
Mexican citizens are called to participate this 1st of July on the federal elections. Some 89 million citizens will vote in this democratic contest for more than 3,000 election posts, among